Chapter 12. All at once the princess jumped to her feet and ran at full speed down the hill and into the wood. She heard howlings and yellings on all sides of her, but she ran straight on, as near as she could judge. Her spirits rose as she ran. Suddenly she saw before her, in the dusk of the thick wood, a group of some dozen wolves and hyenas standing all together right in her way, with their green eyes fixed upon her, staring. She faltered one step, then bethought her of what the wise woman had promised, and keeping straight on, dashed into the middle of them. They fled howling, as if she had struck them with fire. She was no more afraid after that, and ere the sun was up, she was out of the wood and upon the heath, which no bad thing could step upon and live. With the first peep of the sun above the horizon, she saw the little cottage before her, and ran as fast as she could run towards it. When she came near it, she saw that the door was open, and ran straight into the outstretched arms of the wise woman. The wise woman kissed her and stroked her hair, set her down by the fire, and gave her a bowl of bread and milk. When she had eaten it, she drew her before her where she sat, and spoke to her thus: "Rosamond, if you would be a blessed creature instead of a mere wretch, you must submit to be tried." "Is that something terrible?" asked the princess, turning white. "No, my child, but it is something very difficult to come well out of. Nobody who has not been tried knows how difficult it is. But whoever has come well out of it, and those who do not overcome never do come out of it, always looks back with horror, not on what she has come through, but on the very idea of the possibility of having failed and being still the same miserable creature as before." "You will tell me what it is before it begins?" said the princess. "I will not tell you exactly, but I will tell you some things to help you. One great danger is that perhaps you will think you are in it before it has really begun, and say to yourself, 'Oh, this is really nothing to me. It may be a trial to some, but for me I am sure it is not worth mentioning.' And then, before you know it, it will be upon you, and you will fail utterly and shamefully." "I will be very, very careful," said the princess. "Only don't let me be frightened." "You shall not be frightened, except it be your own doing. You are already a brave girl, and there is no occasion to try you more that way. I saw how you rushed into the middle of the ugly creatures, and as they ran from you, so will all kinds of evil things, as long as you keep them outside of you and do not open the cottage of your heart to let them in. I will tell you something more about what you will have to go through. Nobody can be a real princess. Do not imagine you have yet been anything more than a mock one, until she is a princess over herself. That is, until when she finds herself unwilling to do the thing that is right, she makes herself do it. So long as any mood she is in makes her do the thing that she will be sorry for when that mood is over, she is a slave and no princess. A princess is able to do what is right, even should she unhappily be in a mood that would make another unable to do it. For instance, if you should be cross and angry, you are not a whit the less bound to be just, yes, kind even, a thing most difficult in such a mood, though ease itself in a good mood, loving and sweet. Whoever does what she is bound to do, be she the dirtiest little girl in the street, is a princess, worshipful, honorable. Nay, more, her might goes farther than she could send it, for if she acts so, the evil mood will wither and die and leave her loving and clean. Do you understand me, dear Rosamond?" As she spoke, the wise woman laid her hand on her head and looked, oh, so lovingly, into her eyes. "I am not sure," said the princess humbly. "Perhaps you will understand me better if I say it just comes to this, that you must not do what is wrong, however much you are inclined to do it, and you must do what is right, however much you are disinclined to do it." "I understand that," said the princess. "I am going, then, to put you in one of the mood chambers, of which I have many in the house. Its mood will come upon you, and you will have to deal with it." She rose and took her by the hand. The princess trembled a little, but never thought of resisting. The wise woman led her into the great hall with the pictures, and through a door at the farther end opening upon another large hall, which was circular, and had doors close to each other all around it. Of these she opened one, pushed the princess gently in, and closed it behind her. The princess found herself in her old nursery. Her little white rabbit came to meet her in a lumping canter as if his back were going to tumble over his head. Her nurse in her rocking chair by the chimney corner sat just as she had used. The fire burned brightly, and on the table were many of her wonderful toys, on which, however, she now looked with some contempt. Her nurse did not seem at all surprised to see her, any more than if the princess had but just gone from the room and returned again. "Oh, how different I am from what I used to be," thought the princess to herself, looking from her toys to her nurse. "The wise woman has done me so much good already. I will go and see Mamma at once and tell her I am very glad to be at home again and very sorry I was so naughty." She went towards the door. "Your queen mamma, princess, cannot see you now," said her nurse. "I have yet to learn that it is my part to take orders from a servant," said the princess with temper and dignity. "I beg your pardon, princess," returned her nurse politely, "but it is my duty to tell you that your queen mamma is at this moment engaged. She is alone with her most intimate friend, the Prince of the Frozen Regions." "I shall see for myself," returned the princess, bridling, and walked to the door. Now little Bunny, leapfrogging near the door, happened at that moment to get about her feet just as she was going to open it, so that she tripped and fell against it, striking her forehead a good blow. She caught up the rabbit in a rage, and crying, "It's all your fault, you ugly old wretch," threw it with violence in her nurse's face. Her nurse caught the rabbit and held it to her face as if seeking to soothe its fright. But the rabbit looked very limp and odd, and to her amazement Rosamond presently saw that the thing was no rabbit, but a pocket handkerchief. The next moment she removed it from her face, and Rosamond beheld not her nurse, but the wise woman standing on her own hearth, while she herself stood by the door leading from the cottage into the hall. "First trial a failure," said the wise woman quietly. Overcome with shame, Rosamond ran to her, fell down on her knees, and hid her face in her dress. "Need I say anything?" said the wise woman, stroking her hair. "No, no," cried the princess. "I am horrid." "You know now the kind of thing you have to meet. Are you ready to try again?" "May I try again?" cried the princess, jumping up. "I'm ready. I do not think I shall fail this time." "The trial will be harder." Rosamond drew in her breath and set her teeth. The wise woman looked at her pitifully, but took her by the hand, led her to the round hall, opened the same door, and closed it after her. The princess expected to find herself again in the nursery, but in the wise woman's house no one ever has the same trial twice. She was in a beautiful garden full of blossoming trees and the loveliest roses and lilies. A lake was in the middle of it with a tiny boat. So delightful was it that Rosamond forgot all about how or why she had come there and lost herself in the joy of the flowers and the trees and the water. Presently came the shout of a child, merry and glad, and from a clump of tulip trees rushed a lovely little boy with his arms stretched out to her. She was charmed at the sight, ran to meet him, caught him up in her arms, kissed him, and could hardly let him go again. But the moment she set him down, he ran from her towards the lake, looking back as he ran and crying, "Come, come!" She followed. He made straight for the boat, clambered into it, and held out his hand to help her in. Then he caught up the little boat-hook and pushed away from the shore. There was a great white flower floating a few yards off, and that was the little fellow's goal. But alas, no sooner had Rosamond caught sight of it, huge and glowing as a harvest moon, than she felt a great desire to have it herself. The boy, however, was in the bows of the boat and caught it first. It had a long stem reaching down to the bottom of the water, and for a moment he tugged at it in vain. But at last it gave way so suddenly that he tumbled back with the flower into the bottom of the boat. Then Rosamond, almost wild at the danger it was in as he struggled to rise, hurried to save it, but somehow between them it came in pieces, and all its petals of fretted silver were scattered about the boat. When the boy got up and saw the ruin his companion had occasioned, he burst into tears, and having the long stalk of the flower still in his hand, struck her with it across the face. It did not hurt her much, for he was a very little fellow, but it was wet and slimy. She tumbled rather than rushed at him, seized him in her arms, tore him from his frightened grasp, and flung him into the water. His head struck on the boat as he fell, and he sank at once to the bottom, where he lay looking up at her with white face and open eyes. The moment she saw the consequences of her deed, she was filled with horrible dismay. She tried hard to reach down to him through the water, but it was far deeper than it looked, and she could not. Neither could she get her eyes to leave the white face. Its eyes fascinated and fixed hers, and there she lay leaning over the boat and staring at the death she had made. But a voice crying, "Ali! Ali!" shot to her heart, and springing to her feet she saw a lovely lady come running down the grass to the brink of the water with her hair flying about her head. "Where is my Ali?" she shrieked. But Rosamond could not answer, and only stared at the lady, as she had before stared at her drowned boy. Then the lady caught sight of the dead thing at the bottom of the water, and rushed in, and plunging down, struggled and groped until she reached it. Then she rose and stood up with the dead body of her little son in her arms, his head hanging back, and the water streaming from him. "See what you have made of him, Rosamond," she said, holding the body out to her. "And this is your second trial, and also a failure." The dead child melted away from her arms, and there she stood, the wise woman, on her own hearth, while Rosamond found herself beside the little well on the floor of the cottage, with one arm wet up to the shoulder. She threw herself on the heather bed and wept from relief and vexation both. The wise woman walked out of the cottage, shut the door, and left her alone. Rosamond was sobbing so that she did not hear her go. When at length she looked up and saw that the wise woman was gone, her misery returned afresh and tenfold, and she wept and wailed. The hours passed, the shadows of evening began to fall, and the wise woman entered. Chapter 13. She went straight to the bed, and taking Rosamond in her arms, sat down with her by the fire. "My poor child," she said, "2 terrible failures, and the more the harder. They get stronger and stronger. What is to be done?" "Couldn't you help me?" said Rosamond piteously. "Perhaps I could, now you ask me," answered the wise woman. "When you are ready to try again, we shall see." "I am very tired of myself," said the princess, "but I can't rest till I try again." "That is the only way to get rid of your weary, shadowy self and find your strong, true self. Come, my child, I will help you all I can, for now I can help you." Yet again she led her to the same door, and seemed to the princess to send her yet again alone into the room. She was in a forest, a place half wild, half tended. The trees were grand and full of the loveliest birds, of all glowing, gleaming, and radiant colors, which, unlike the brilliant birds we know in our world, sang deliciously, every one according to his color. The trees were not at all crowded, but their leaves were so thick and their boughs spread so far that it was only here and there a sunbeam could get straight through. All the gentle creatures of the forest were there, but no creatures that killed. Not even a weasel to kill the rabbits or a beetle to eat the snails out of their striped shells. As to the butterflies, words would but wrong them if they tried to tell how gorgeous they were. The princess's delight was so great that she neither laughed nor ran, but walked about with a solemn countenance and stately step. "But where are the flowers?" she said to herself at length. They were nowhere. Neither on the high trees nor on the few shrubs that grew here and there amongst them were there any blossoms, and in the grass that grew everywhere there was not a single flower to be seen. "Ah, well," said Rosamond again to herself, "where all the birds and butterflies are living flowers, we can do without the other sort." Still she could not help feeling that flowers were wanted to make the beauty of the forest complete. Suddenly she came out on a little open glade, and there on the root of a great oak sat the loveliest little girl with her lap full of flowers of all colors, but of such kind as Rosamond had never before seen. She was playing with them, burying her hands in them, tumbling them about, and every now and then picking one from the rest and throwing it away. All the time she never smiled except with her eyes, which were as full as they could hold of the laughter of the spirit, a laughter which in this world is never heard, only sets the eyes alight with a liquid shining. Rosamond drew nearer, for the wonderful creature would have drawn a tiger to her side and tamed him on the way. A few yards from her she came upon one of her cast-away flowers and stooped to pick it up, as well she might where none grew save in her own longing. But to her amazement she found, instead of a flower thrown away to wither, one fast-rooted and quite at home. She left it and went to another, but it also was fast in the soil and growing comfortably in the warm grass. What could it mean? One after another she tried, until at length she was satisfied that it was the same with every flower the little girl threw from her lap. She watched then, until she saw her throw one and instantly bounded to the spot, but the flower had been quicker than she. There it grew, fast fixed in the earth, and there, she thought, looked at her roguishly. Something evil moved in her, and she plucked it. "Don't, don't!" cried the child. "My flowers cannot live in your hands." Rosamond looked at the flower. It was withered already. She threw it from her, offended. The child rose, with difficulty keeping her lapful together, picked it up, carried it back, sat down again, spoke to it, kissed it, sang to it. Oh, such a sweet, childish little song! The princess never could recall a word of it, and threw it away. Up rose its little head, and there it was, busy growing again. Rosamond's bad temper soon gave way. The beauty and the sweetness of the child had overcome it, and, anxious to make friends with her, she drew near and said, "Won't you give me a little flower, please, you beautiful child?" "There they are. They are all for you," answered the child, pointing with her outstretched arm and forefinger all around. "But you told me a minute ago not to touch them." "Yes, indeed I did." "They can't be mine if I am not to touch them." "If to call them yours you must kill them, then they are not yours, and never, never can be yours. They are nobody's when they are dead." "But you don't kill them." "I don't pull them. I throw them away. I live them." "How is it that you make them grow?" "I say, 'You darling,' and throw it away, and there it is." "Where do you get them?" "In my lap." "I wish you would let me throw one away." "Have you got any in your lap?" "Let me see." "No, I have none." "Then you can't throw one away if you haven't got one." "You are mocking me," cried the princess. "I am not mocking you," said the child, looking her full in the face with reproach in her large blue eyes. "Oh, that's where the flowers come from," said the princess to herself the moment she saw them, hardly knowing what she meant. Then the child rose as if hurt, and quickly threw all the flowers she had in her lap, but one by one and without any sign of anger. When they were all gone, she stood a moment, and then in a kind of chanting cry called 2 or 3 times, "Peggy! Peggy! Peggy!" A low, glad cry like the whinny of a horse answered, and presently out of the wood on the opposite side of the glade came gently trotting the loveliest little snow-white pony, with great shining blue wings half lifted from his shoulders. Straight towards the little girl, neither hurrying nor lingering, he trotted with light, elastic tread. Rosamond's love for animals broke into a perfect passion of delight at the vision. She rushed to meet the pony with such haste that, although clearly the best trained animal under the sun, he started back, plunged, reared, and struck out with his forefeet ere he had time to observe what sort of a creature it was that had so startled him. When he perceived it was a little girl, he dropped instantly upon all fours, and, content with avoiding her, resumed his quiet trot in the direction of his mistress. Rosamond stood gazing after him in miserable disappointment. When he reached the child, he laid his head on her shoulder, and she put her arm up around his neck, and after she had talked to him a little, he turned and came trotting back to the princess. Almost beside herself with joy, she began caressing him in the rough way which, notwithstanding her love for them, she was in the habit of using with animals. And she was not gentle enough, in herself even, to see that he did not like it, and was only putting up with it for the sake of his mistress. But when, that she might jump upon his back, she laid hold of one of his wings and ruffled some of the blue feathers, he wheeled suddenly about, gave his long tail a sharp whisk which threw her flat on the grass, and trotting back to his mistress, bent down his head before her, as if asking excuse for ridding himself of the unbearable. The princess was furious. She had forgotten all her past life up to the time when she first saw the child. Her beauty had made her forget, and yet she was now on the very borders of hating her. What she might have done, or rather tried to do, had not Peggy's tail struck her down with such force that for a moment she could not rise, I cannot tell. But while she lay half-stunned, her eyes fell on a little flower just under them. It stared up in her face like the living thing it was, and she could not take her eyes off its face. It was like a primrose trying to express doubt instead of confidence. It seemed to put her half in mind of something, and she felt as if shame were coming. She put out her hand to pluck it, but the moment her fingers touched it, the flower withered up and hung as dead on its stalks as if a flame of fire had passed over it. Then a shudder thrilled through the heart of the princess, and she thought with herself, saying, "What sort of a creature am I that the flowers wither when I touch them, and the ponies despise me with their tails? What a wretched, coarse, ill-bred creature I must be! There is that lovely child giving life instead of death to the flowers, and a moment ago I was hating her. I am horrid, and I shall be horrid, and I hate myself, yet I can't help being myself." She heard the sound of galloping feet, and there was the pony with the child seated betwixt his wings, coming straight on at full speed for where she lay. "I don't care," she said. "They may trample me under their feet if they like. I am tired and sick of myself, a creature at whose touch the flowers wither." On came the winged pony, but while yet some distance off he gave a great bound, spread out his living sails of blue, rose yards and yards above her in the air, and alighted as gently as a bird just a few feet on the other side of her. The child slipped down and came and kneeled over her. "Did my pony hurt you?" she said. "I am so sorry." "Yes, he did hurt me," answered the princess, "but not more than I deserved, for I took liberties with him, and he did not like it." "Oh, you dear," said the little girl, "I love you for talking so of my Peggy. He is a good pony, though a little playful sometimes. Would you like a ride upon him?" "You darling beauty," cried Rosamond, sobbing. "I do love you so. You are so good. How did you become so sweet?" "Would you like to ride my pony?" repeated the child with a heavenly smile in her eyes. "No, no. He is fit only for you. My clumsy body would hurt him," said Rosamond. "You don't mind me having such a pony?" said the child. "What? Mind it?" cried Rosamond almost indignantly. Then, remembering certain thoughts that had but a few moments before passed through her mind, she looked on the ground and was silent. "You don't mind it, then?" repeated the child. "I am very glad there is such a you and such a pony, and that such a you has got such a pony," said Rosamond, still looking on the ground. "But I do wish the flowers would not die when I touch them. I was cross to see you make them grow. But now I should be content only if I did not make them wither." As she spoke, she stroked the little girl's bare feet, which were by her, half buried in the soft moss, and as she ended, she laid her cheek on them and kissed them. "Dear princess," said the little girl, "the flowers will not always wither at your touch. Try now, only do not pluck it. Flowers ought never to be plucked except to give away. Touch it gently." A silvery flower, something like a snowdrop, grew just within her reach. Timidly she reached out her hand and touched it. The flower trembled, but neither shrank nor withered. "Touch it again," said the child. It changed color a little, and Rosamond fancied it grew larger. "Touch it again," said the child. It opened and grew until it was as large as a narcissus, and changed and deepened in color till it was a red, glowing gold. Rosamond gazed motionless. When the transfiguration of the flower was perfected, she sprang to her feet with clasped hands, but for very ecstasy of joy stood speechless, gazing at the child. "Did you never see me before, Rosamond?" she asked. "No, never," answered the princess. "I never saw anything half so lovely." "Look at me," said the child. And as Rosamond looked, the child began, like the flower, to grow larger. Quickly through every gradation of growth she passed until she stood before her a woman, perfectly beautiful, neither old nor young, for hers was the old age of everlasting youth. Rosamond was utterly enchanted, and stood gazing without word or movement until she could endure no more delight. Then her mind collapsed to the thought, had the pony grown too? She glanced round. There was no pony, no grass, no flowers, no bright-birded forest, but the cottage of the wise woman, and before her on the hearth of it, the goddess child, the only thing unchanged. She gasped with astonishment. "You must set out for your father's palace immediately," said the lady. "But where is the wise woman?" asked Rosamond, looking all about. "Here," said the lady, and Rosamond, looking again, saw the wise woman folded as usual in her long dark cloak. "And it was you all the time?" she cried in delight, and kneeled before her, burying her face in her garments. "It always is me, all the time," said the wise woman, smiling. "But which is the real you?" asked Rosamond. "This or that?" "Or 1,000 others," returned the wise woman. "But the one you have just seen is the likest to the real me that you were able to see just yet. And that me you could not have seen a little while ago. But, my darling child," she went on, lifting her up and clasping her to her bosom, "you must not think because you have seen me once that therefore you are capable of seeing me at all times. No, there are many things in you yet that must be changed before that can be. Now, however, you will seek me. Every time you feel you want me, that is a sign I am wanting you. There are yet many rooms in my house you may have to go through, but when you need no more of them, you will be able to throw flowers like the little girl you saw in the forest." The princess gave a sigh. "Do not think," the wise woman went on, "that the things you have seen in my house are mere empty shows. You do not know, you cannot yet think how living and true they are. Now you must go." She led her once more into the great hall, and there showed her the picture of her father's capital and his palace with the brazen gates. "There is your home," she said. "Go to it." The princess understood, and a flush of shame rose to her forehead. She turned to the wise woman and said, "Will you forgive all my naughtiness and all the trouble I have given you?" "If I had not forgiven you, I would never have taken the trouble to punish you. If I had not loved you, do you think I would have carried you away in my cloak?" "How could you love such an ugly, ill-tempered, rude, hateful little wretch?" "I saw through it all what you were going to be," said the wise woman, kissing her. "But remember, you have yet only begun to be what I saw." "I will try to remember," said the princess, holding her cloak and looking up in her face. "Go then," said the wise woman. Rosamond turned away on the instant, ran to the picture, stepped over the frame of it, heard a door close gently, gave one glance back, saw behind her the loveliest palace front of alabaster gleaming in the pale yellow light of an early summer morning, looked again to the eastward, saw the faint outline of her father's city against the sky, and ran off to reach it. It looked much farther off now than when it seemed a picture, but the sun was not yet up, and she had the whole of a summer day before her. And that is the end of chapter 13. And I will see you next in chapter 14, which is the final chapter. See you then.